Hello. So, this is my highly anticipated review of the game The Quarry, released in 2022 by 2K and Supermassive Games. If you haven't heard of it or its predecessor, Until Dawn, it is an interactive horror game that's more like a movie. There's very little gameplay aside from choosing dialogue and performing QTE events, which determine what a character does, or if they succeed in performing an action that may just save their life. The Quarry is seen as the spiritual successor to Until Dawn, but it is not a sequel. I believe that was their intention originally, but there were some changes due to company mergers and deadlines, but I'm here to talk about the game itself, not the means by which it came into being. I've played Until Dawn and it was quite enjoyable. I'd never played that game type before, and I was more than willing to pick up the Quarry to see what they do with a new cast of characters and setting. The possibilities are kind of infinite for a franchise like this because it is essentially just a horror movie, and despite the shortcomings that I'm going to go over in this video, I would like to play a lot more games in this vein. I would go over the game mechanics, but I already essentially have. It's more of an interactive horror movie with very little in the way of what you do as a player in terms of the percentage of time spent from start to finish where you do anything aside from listening to the characters and meander around as them. There is an ongoing mechanic of the game, tied to the plot, where a third-party fortune teller will give you hints between chapters on what not to do, or rather, what will be an upcoming event option to prepare for. Since this is a decision-based game, I'm sure that sounds like it would be really helpful, but I personally had an awful time actually finding the tarot cards, which, if you know anything about me, is kind of insane because I took the time to walk into as many weird dead ends as I could looking for them. And yet, for several story chapters, I came up empty-handed. The crappy thing, too, is that the times that I did find a tarot, I'd typically find more than one. It was like certain chapters were disproportionately spotted with them. Anyway, you can only watch one at a time, so finding more than one per chapter doesn't benefit you, at least not in your first playthrough. If you wanted to see more of them to help guide you, you could just skip them entirely altogether the whole way through if you wanted. As much as I was a little jaded by the fact my usually beneficial over-curious playstyle didn't help me at all, specifically in that I got 0 tarots for at least half of the chapters, I didn't actually find the tarots that helpful. The game functions almost exclusively in reality, with supernatural elements of course, but essentially if you have good common sense and have watched enough horror movies to have a survival instinct, it's not hard to manage to have all the characters live in the end. Me and my playthrough buddies would have had all main playable characters live on our first try if we'd used our revives. We let Max and Caitlin die because I thought that Max might be an asset to other survivals, when he just actually straight up ended up dying by choosing to try to get involved, and Caitlin died because I fucked up a QTE. I should have known better, having predicted that the consequences of extending the hold breath action would result in a character revealing themselves with a big inhale and give themselves away if I'd held too long. Really early on I called it, but since that hadn't come in beforehand in other instances, I got cocky that they would ever actually employ that. There is a saving grace in the game where when a character dies, you can choose to revive them. You get 3 tries in 1 playthrough. The only reason that we didn't have everyone live is because we chose not to revive them and try again, afraid that we would waste a heart on a character that we didn't care about living as much as someone else. As it turns out, if we just revived them and not been overly cautious gamers, we would have gotten a home run on the first try. Which brings me to consider the game's difficulty rating. I'd like to stress that we only watched half the amount of tarots possible in any given playthrough. They didn't actually matter because the situations weren't hard to discern what the right call was. I want to appreciate the game for functioning on logical terms. I do. I know I'd be much madder if every time that I picked a smart decision, I got punished for some reason, obviously, but in being a good player and making continuously good choices and winning all the important QTE events, it made for a much less thrilling narrative experience overall. Spoilers for the end of the game. Be warned, this is a spoiler-heavy channel. If you're watching this video, I assume you already know what we're talking about. Technically, what I say doesn't matter though, because there are several ways for the game to end, but the ending that I got, and what you can watch an almost full playthrough of on this channel, linked in the card above, is that the ending I got was kind of lame. It was similar to what happened to me with the ending of Witcher 3. There were so many options in the gameplay that sometimes the ending you get pinned with is unsatisfying because it cannot address all of the possibilities and variations of choices that you've made along the way. To me, as a person, the objective choice in the Quarry was to kill Silas, the original werewolf, and cure any remaining ones in Hackett's Quarry. The way that I played in specifically, because I didn't get a lot of tarots, and the ones I did get were so indiscernible that they didn't help, I did not form a bond with the fortune teller character. I was not inclined to spare her son in the slightest. So again, the logical choice meant that I didn't needlessly get fucked over in the final sequence and lose one of my main characters that I've been working so hard to save the whole time. I think that I'd have been pretty pissed if Ryan or Laura or both had died because I decided to side with the fortune teller. My fucked up mommy radar was on point. But again, if you wanted a compelling narrative, like if you wanted to experience a good conflicting story, the option was to not be smart about things. During my first playthrough, there were a couple instances where logic blipped, which made me a bit angry. For example, the Hillbilly Mansion electric cage puzzle. The entire game otherwise had all the character actions and options function within, reality. You can ask, what's the right thing to do? And that is the answer. But this goddamn sequence with the fuse box was not what you would encounter in real life. The fuse box to unlock the doors was numbered and supposed to be activated by a sum to open the door that you wanted. And that makes no fucking sense. If you wanted door 5 to open, you had to open the 2 and 3 breaker, so it adds up to 5. Like, why the fuck would the hillbillies label their own fuse box so it was more complicated to use? Quite frankly, I don't think Bobby was up to the math. When a game essentially functions through reality, but it throws game logic in spontaneously, that's a real issue for me. It breaks immersion. It derails the system that you've been set up to expect and deal with. This kind of game, that trust and follow through is all you have. Thankfully, that was the only truly egregious instance of this happening like that, but that's something to note. I care about consistency. It can be full nonsense or absolute physics, and truly, a consistent soft magic system is 100% preferable to me, but betraying any of those and what they're doing is a major detriment to the player experience. This being the first interactive movie game that I've played, aside from Until Dawn and Netflix's Bandersnatch, I don't know what their general standards are in terms of player autonomy. I really want to play Life is Strange, and I've heard great things, but as it stands in my playthrough of the Quarry, I am a bit underwhelmed by the game type. The strangest thing is, though, as much as I might have liked other options during some moments, like I didn't get the option to hide rather than do a task like go to the car yard or face off in an open area of the lodge in the first place, like before the action scene starts, those moments were mostly minimal. I wasn't constantly angry at the characters for forcing me to choose between two totally awful decisions or anything. The biggest logical inconsistency I had about the game were ones entirely outside of the main character's capacity. I don't understand why Kaylee and Caleb were left to run around the campgrounds as werewolves in the first place. Even if the camp counselors didn't accidentally have to stay another night, why were they loose? What, Hackett, so you were just gonna let the werewolves hunt the woods for unsuspecting human hikers? Because that runs a bit contrary to the grandmother whose opening lines to Travis are about not wanting to spill any more blood, or not having any more blood on their hands. I don't know what her exact quote was, but Travis, at least, certainly doesn't want more blood, and he implied at one point that he was willing to kill Caleb to free Chris and Kaylee because they hadn't had a shot at Silas in 6 years and the shit was getting ridiculous. I sympathize, my man. So the logic of the premise itself kinda just doesn't make sense. If Travis, his dad, and Bobby are all always out on a full moon looking for Silas to kill and end the curse, why the hell would they let their family werewolves out prowling too? Just because the Hacketts have blood to put on their faces that make werewolves disinclined to attack them, that's just asking for trouble. What if the blood wears off? It did rain, and blood did get washed off of characters in this game while I was playing. Did they not check the forecast? So ultimately, why weren't Kaylee and Caleb locked up? Where did they even go, having left the camp early and not helped the counselors pack up, if it wasn't to seclude themselves somewhere? Since we're already on this line of questioning, I'm sorry. I want to know what measures they had in place and what they did while camp was still running. Even if we forget about the last 6 years. While Max and Laura are locked up in Travis's jail cell, at least one lunar cycle passes, which is when Max turns and scratches out Laura's eye. So what did Chris and Kaylee and Caleb do then? And why didn't they do it again? That's why the Hackett's have electric cages in their basement, and they are functional at the start of this game, so why weren't they in them? But let's get past this, shall we? To me, this is a major plot hole in why the events of the game take place, but it isn't something that could get fixed through better character choices in-game. There were some mild continuity issues, like the van bouncing around so much when you approach it. If it's normal Emma and not werewolf Emma, she wouldn't be making that much racket, and the game should have cut that out based on that change of narrative, but I digress. Because my first playthrough was also almost a solid all-live run, and would have been if we hadn't been stingy with our revives, I decided to look up just how many options there were to have characters die. As it turns out, there's well over an hour of footage and semi-unique animations for character deaths, which would be impressive, but a good percentage of the options in which characters die are a matter of not playing the game. For example, many of the deaths are the outcome of a character choosing not to shoot a werewolf when you have control of them, in which case, obviously, the werewolf attacks and kills them. Likewise, failing QTEs can get characters killed, but the game gives you a lot of time to perform them, and there isn't an element of difficulty to them. The death options also tend to cluster up, where one character has a dozen options to die throughout one single chase. For example, Emma, when she's exploring the treehouse, can get mauled at the start, fail multiple QTEs in which she'll trip and get torn to pieces, or fall to her death trying to use the zipline. I understand why the game made the QuickTime events so easy to complete. It's a long game. It averages on 9 hours to play through, and since it's a movie format, players are liable to sit back, relax, and lose focus. Therefore, also likely to miss sudden action prompts and get pissed. Although there were revives, if you are bad at decision making or genuinely panic and fuck up QTEs, losing a character is a daunting, frustrating thing. You can't go back to previously played chapters to start over until you have beaten the game, and losing a specific character could make the survival options of another one all the harder, or impossible, which you probably don't know at the time, so if you choose not to revive them in hopes of saving someone else later on, you may just be dooming them all. Which again means that there's a minimum several hour commitment before being allowed to go back and experiment. And when you can go back and experiment, if there are only some parts you wish to try again and not others, you still absolutely have to sit and suffer through the rest of the cutscenes. They really, really needed a speed up option. So as much as I understand why they made it easy to succeed, at a certain point I wish they hadn't bothered adding QTEs at all. There are a lot of situations in the game where there are QTE events that don't actually have a consequence, so it's nothing but an illusion of gameplay. The most annoying instance of this, in my opinion, was the fortune teller's flashback with the Hierophant tarot card, which I was forced into watching instead of being given a choice of any of the other ones that I found in that chapter, which in and of itself was annoying. I had a severe lack of investment in Eliza, the fortune teller, and her werewolf son, Silas. She was obviously two-faced and didn't care about helping me in my playthrough so much as getting what she wanted in the end through manipulation, which was to let her son live. Her writing was laughably bad, honestly. Like, who on earth would sympathize with her? Anyway, multiple times throughout the gameplay, if you choose to question Travis, you will be given a recounting of the events that led to his family getting infected. Caleb and Kaylee Hackett wanted to free Silas from his mother's cage, but in causing a distraction to do so, they burnt down the whole traveling freak show and got infected themselves with lycanthropy, along with their father Chris. The Hierophant tarot card just shows us that, but from Eliza's perspective, coming upon the scene of the fire's aftermath. There's no new information given or twist on the story. We just zoom in on Eliza's face as she rages about losing her son for far too long, and then she dies in the fire too, like we knew all along. This wasting of my time was annoying, but there were mild interactive parts to this flashback. I'm given a quick couple seconds to pan through the scene as the fire rages, which is highly unnecessary because I can essentially see the whole thing without panning in the first place, so it's just fake player autonomy. Eliza can wander over and interact with a burnt body only to realize it's the sheriff, which is obvious by the badge, and yet she lingers way too long reacting to that too. A steel pole is shot from the wreckage, and we're given a QTE event to save her. If you don't perform the action, she'll be impaled and die. If you do, she'll die in a blast from the fire she walks directly into anyway, right afterwards. So why give me that choice? That doesn't affect anything. 1, why are you wasting my time with this flashback if you're not going to provide anything new for a character I already don't like? And 2, why introduce the ability to pan and interact in QTE when it all results in the same goddamn thing? Eliza is already dead. This is a flashback. I can't change anything, so why are you letting me play a little bit like I can? So hopefully that exemplifies how there were some mildly infuriating cases in the Quarry, where it used itself as interactable, like as a game, to give the illusion of autonomy in situations where it didn't make sense and entirely wastes your time. There are so many times throughout playable characters' chapters where they have to walk around, and the walking can't be sped up, it is ungodly slow, and it cannot be skipped, which makes replaying the game extremely tedious. You could argue that this bit of freedom was given as a means for players the ability to find tarots, but I'd beg to differ based on my experience, and regardless, it consumes a lot of time uselessly. In many cases, it would have been more player-friendly to cut the walking or QTEs and just present the players with options of what they'd like to skip to or do without dragging it out. In that regard, as someone who is actively holding the controller and playing the game the whole time, some of the interrupts were not even clear. For example, in the electric cage room, Ryan goes to touch the cage and you're given a chance to stop him as Laura from hurting himself. That is given as a clear consequence of not performing the interrupt because we had a scene showing that it was electrified. However, I missed the interrupt from Ryan's perspective to stop Laura because it wasn't clear what Laura was even doing. Surely, she wasn't touching the cage herself. Nope, she was killing Nick. Despite them having acknowledged, or at the very least the player knows, that performing such a blatantly loud action would alert the Hacketts that are arguing right above them. I didn't stop Laura, so she killed Nick, and that used one of my revives because it wasn't clear what was happening, and therefore the consequences of it. It should not have been as plain as stop Laura as the interrupt. It should have been an option with a few extra words elaborating stop Laura from killing Nick, or save Nick from Laura, much more like the dialogue options do, so I knew what my choices even were, like what was happening. Now, as easy as it seemed on my first run to have characters live, the average first playthrough is much more likely to be a hodgepodge of survivors and deaths. If you like the characters and aren't outright pissed off by some of the outcomes that you got, that is supposed to be the main driving factor to coerce players to play the game again, or go back and alter their chapters from a certain point. However, the time commitment, as mentioned before, in unskippable cutscenes, dialogue, and playing walking simulator, can be very boring. Hoping to perform an all-live, all-die, or all-infect playthrough is nigh impossible without looking up a game guide. Even once you have fully played through the game, it can be hard to determine what actions will affect outcomes further down the line if you're not playing by a guide's rules. I decided to play through the Quarry again in an attempt to kill all the characters instead, hoping it would save me a lot of playtime since entire storylines would be cut upon each character's death. What I didn't know upon playing the Quarry originally was that all the playable characters can get infected to become werewolves, so I infected a couple of them to gauge how hard that achievement actually is, and aimed to promptly kill them afterwards. On my second playthrough, I infected Emma, Abby, Dylan, and Caitlin. And Nick, of course, because you don't get a choice on that one. Whereas in my first achieved all-live playthrough, I only infected Ryan. I was actually trying to kill everyone in my second playthrough. I let a few infected moments slip in, like I made sure Emma's leg got bit, but I also immediately threw her off the treehouse on a failed zipline grab and killed her. Unfortunately, what I didn't know is that at a certain stage of werewolf infection, other werewolves will not attack each other. Like I mentioned in my playthrough, what if they can smell each other and don't attack? Well, that's definitely a thing. So the fact that I let Dylan and Caitlin get infected meant I couldn't kill them. My kill run failed even though I was armed with the knowledge of all possible character deaths and intentionally leaned into them. I didn't touch the controller to save Dylan in the junkyard, and I actively threw Caitlin off a beam to smash her head. Infecting characters and not killing them during the attempt is not easy. Some can only be infected at a specific moment or need prerequisites to be infected, so it's pretty unlikely to stumble upon that moment, let alone intentionally enact it with multiple characters without actively following a game guide, which is what I did. And that is a major detriment to the game, which is already hard to convince yourself to replay due to the time investment. Imagine messing up one scene multiple times just trying to figure out how to infect Emma on your own. There are 2 specific QTEs that you're supposed to fail to make that happen and do the rest of them. Like, how are you supposed to know that on your own? That would take hours. It is my own fault for infecting characters, but again, until I got all the way to the second last chapter, when Dylan would be my first infected player to come head to head with a werewolf, I didn't know that he would be spared, despite my best efforts. If anyone was going to set that precedent for me, I thought it would have been Nick sparing Abby because I'd let her get infected by the time that he came after her in the boathouse. Or swim house? Pool house? Dylan got bit in chapter 5, and the outcome of his immunity, or that I found out anyone had immunity, didn't reveal to me until chapter 9. The act of undoing that singular decision to get the opportunity to kill him was too many chapters and hours of commitment to bother going back and cutting off his hand, so that doesn't happen. As much as I respect the game for having so many variables between who can live, die, or turn, and how that affects everyone else's options closer to the end, I wish it was easier to be able to skip to and play through those specific parts, the catalysts, straight to the consequences themselves, because otherwise you'll never experience a fraction of them, and without a game guide, likely never get the outcomes you want, even though, as the fortune teller says, the whole point of the game is supposed to be that it's your choice. Now for my very specific, highly scientific game rating system. The genre Ghoul got a 5 out of 10. As The Quarry is more an interactive movie than a horror game, it is hard to give it a rating on its scariness. At the very start of my time interacting with the game, me and my friends were all quite anxious. It did a good job getting that reaction out of us, but that was also sort of in part because of who we are. The premise of a decision-making game is just anxiety-inducing, and we were overthinking every little thing we did to the extreme. As the game went on and it became clear that most of the dialogue options don't have consequences, and many dangerous-looking QTEs don't even net a death, that hold it had on us was broken alongside that illusion. I don't personally know every single thing there is to know about the game, but your ability to pick things along the storyline itself does not change depending on whether Ryan thinks Dylan is funny or not. No werewolf versions of characters have enough sentience to restrain from killing another if they like them more. The only relationship that seems to matter in that regard is Travis and Laura, and even then, the outcome changing from Travis working alongside Laura, even prompting her to kill him if she so chooses, and him killing her in cold blood after she's been cured, is how much of his family you kill as Laura beforehand, not how compliant she is as Travis's prisoner when he locked her in a jail cell for 2 months. At least that's what I gleaned from the situation. The Quarry should have been treated more like a pick-your-own-story based on decisions, rather than introducing random non-consequential QTEs in a lot of places, and I think that would have been more satisfying as an experience. I was literally hate playing it by the end, walking around as Max after he was cured, because if this was a movie, they would have cut that out. Why not show me him waking up and going to the dock where I'd have to make my actual choice? Sure, it was only a couple minutes, but that adds up when you're not allowed to skip anything and you want to play it more than once. So I think The Quarry would have improved if it had been more of either just a movie or more of just a game, rather than do a mid-job of sustaining both. For complexity and skills required in the game, I gave it a 7 out of 10. The skill required to play the game is very minimal, but the time investment is its own beast. The QTEs were easy to the point of being unnecessary, but none of the ones you might want to fudge on purpose for a more interesting gameplay were something that you could discern without a game guide. Very easy to play, harder to play how you might want to, if that makes sense. Playability got an 8 out of 10. The initial story investment and will to play the game at the start was very strong. I liked the characters, they were cute and full of banter, and I wanted to see what situations they'd get thrown into. To balance that out though, the replayability is only 3 out of 10. If I hadn't gotten close to getting a full Survivor playthrough on the first run, The replayability aspect and draw for me to play it again was next to non-existent, which is ironic since I've now spent 23 hours in-game on my Steam account. I'm not sure how much of that could possibly count on the menu screen, but I did play it through again because I got frustrated enough at the gameplay to want to see how long it would take to kill them all afterwards. That wasn't something I did for my own enjoyment though, so much as to have a better, well-rounded opinion for this review. In my second playthrough, also up on this channel now, you'll notice that I was writing this script the entire time, just waiting for the game to finally let me play. So not engaged, not really enjoying myself on the second playthrough. Characters got a 7 out of 10. I found them quite enjoyable. Well, and the ones that I wasn't supposed to like gave me an immediate visceral hatred, Emma, which in turn implicated Jacob, so in the unlikable characters, that was also equally well done. However, the Hackett family and their motivations were a mess. Story gets an 8 out of 10. As a literal horror movie game, the story was great. It's pretty much all story, aside from the meandering gameplay aspects. I gave graphics a 7 out of 10. The technical competence of the graphics were astounding in some points. Looking at the characters and how the physics interacted with the environment were the most realistic in games I have ever played. Not that I play a lot of newer games with high graphics, but still. The water in the quarry was the only thing not up to par, but I can excuse that. What I couldn't excuse was the darkness. It was unplayable at some points. If I happened to walk a character into a corner while looking for a tarot, I'd literally lose which direction I'd come from because I was just in a void. I played the game at its prescribed darkness setting, so I'm basing my opinion on that. Yes, I could have bumped the brightness up to max, but in a horror game like this, that is tantamount to cheating. I also felt as though some of the areas in the quarry were not discernible enough from one another. When Jacob and Emma meet up again after she's escaped the treehouse island, in the chase scene that happens at that point, me and my play partner had no idea where they were. Like, we hadn't spent enough time on the map, we didn't know what was going on, we were just running on a boarded walk again that wasn't the treehouse island, but we'd never been here before, so we were like confused that we were on the treehouse island again for some reason. We weren't. But the point is, everything was so dark and the same that it was hard to know, which is a bad point against them. Functionality of the game got a 5 out of 10. First logging on, we actually struggled to get the game to size correctly. It was actually so much of a difficulty that we almost gave up, but I believe that was a PC problem that doesn't occur on every version. I'm also going to clump the inability to replay parts of the game into this because while there is a whole section on the main menu where you can review the paths that you updated and chose, it is just so lame. Like, why bother looking at them? It's just a crappy slideshow. Not only did I not find many tarots, which I would consider more of a game mechanic than an Easter egg, but most of them were indiscernible. The crystal ball and how it displayed them was usually nothing but garbled garbage, so the fact that it didn't function how it was meant for the player is a major mark against it. The game never crashed on me, but I would say that it needed some accessibility work in just function. I gave controls a 7 out of 10. The controls were fine, over easy in my opinion. Not only do I wish there were more skip functions, but perhaps difficulty levels. And last and most importantly, my personal enjoyment level was a 5 out of 10. My personal enjoyment was hard to quantify. Obviously, I played the ending of it the first time. The draw to complete a different run was enough to get me to play again though, and I've spent way more time on the game than I ever originally intended, so regardless of its flaws, it was still a good game, making its final score a 62 out of 100. As for suggested improvements, I think it has replay value as a group game, but the fact that you cannot do any of the hard option outcomes like an all-infect run without assistance from a game guide means it is a big waste of time and investment to try for other specific endings as an individual. I love that they have a couch co-op option. That is, I think, the ideal way to play through this game if you are going to, but then again, if you have a friend group of shitters, it could be an even bigger time suck to play the game out how you wanted, so what do I know? So that was my first genuine game review. I hope that was thorough enough for you. I am so glad to have now totally burned myself out on the Quarry so I can move on with my life. As you may have noticed, it's consumed my life for a good 2 weeks now. That fact alone, and to me only rating it at 62, may seem like a contradiction, but take my biases as you will. Thanks a bunch for watching all that rambling. Jesus. If you think I'm a cool ghoul, subscribe and like my stuff, and hey, you could even support me through my Ko-fi if you wanted. No pressure though. Okay, I'll see you after my next game obsession. Bye.